At 0917 UTC, every deep space listening post on the planet receives the same signal simultaneously. Not a burst, not a coded ping. A voice, calm, almost musical in its precision. The kind of voice that belongs to someone who has never once been told no and actually believed it. Every language processor on Earth scrambles immediately, but the translation barely matters because the tone translates perfectly on its own, the way a scalpel communicates its purpose without needing a manual. Child, Station 7 in Nevada picks it up first. A technician named Reyes, 26 years old, 3 weeks from a transfer to the London office, stares at her readout and whispers something the recording captures clearly. That's not a mothership. That's a throne. She is correct. She will not make the London transfer. The message lasts 47 seconds and contains exactly 3 components: an identification, a demand, and a timeline. The identification is brief: a name, a designation, an imperial classification number that Dr. Strange will later cross-reference against the Sanctum's deepest archive and find in exactly one source: a fragment of cosmic cartography from a civilization that no longer exists, filed under entities encountered and survived by nobody. The demand is specific: resources, artifacts, coordinates, a list that reflects knowledge of Earth's assets that should not be possible from an external observation position. And the timeline, 48 hours, polite, almost generous. Its final line, translated consistently across every system on Earth: non-compliance will be educational, not threatening, educational. That single word is what makes the generals go quiet. Inside Stark Tower, Friday's anomaly alert fires the moment the signal hits, and Tony Stark is already awake because Tony Stark is always already awake, which is a separate problem nobody has successfully addressed. He pulls the data before his coffee reaches his mouth. The readout is, by any previous standard of alien incursion data, extraordinary. A vessel mass that Friday calculates, then recalculates, then flags as recalibration required because the number keeps returning the same impossible figure. Tony sets the coffee down. He stares at the holographic readout for 4 full seconds, which for his processing speed is equivalent to 45 minutes for anyone else. Then, without inflection, "That's a big ship." Friday responds, "Hull alloy returning unknown across all 17 spectral analyses, sir," Tony says. "Unknown as in we haven't seen it, or unknown as in the test broke?" Friday pauses. "The second one, sir." Tony picks the coffee back up. "Great. Space IKEA. Here is what you need to understand before this story goes any further, because this is the fact that changes everything. The Avengers have never faced a being who treats planetary acquisition as paperwork. Thanos wanted to fix a broken equation. Loki wanted a throne. Ultron wanted to evolve. Every threat Earth has ever absorbed cared about the outcome, the cause, being right. What has just parked itself in Earth's sky cares about one thing only: the line item, the entry in the ledger, the return on investment of a resource operation that your entire civilization represents approximately 2 hours of logistical planning for. You are not the protagonist of this story. You are the inventory. Dr. Strange feels the arrival before any instrument catches it, which is how Strange experiences everything that matters, slightly ahead of the evidence, in the specific sensory register of someone who has spent a career learning to read disturbances in dimensions that don't have names yet. He is at the Sanctum window at 0914 UTC, 3 minutes before the Friday alert, watching the sky with the expression his students recognize as Strange noticing something, not alarmed, noticing. What he feels is not entirely Frieza. There is something else adjacent to the arrival, riding alongside it without being part of it. It doesn't feel malevolent or structured. It feels, and he will not write this in any official report, like the universe has developed an audience. He files the sensation. He has learned that the things he cannot categorize yet are always the ones that matter most later. The Avengers assemble, because of course they do. Tony triangulates coordinates in 11 seconds. Thor recognizes the energy signature and says something in Old Norse that Friday politely declines to translate. Rogers gives the look, the one that means we've handled worse. And here's the thing, he is not wrong based on everything he knows. Based on the Chitauri, based on Thanos, based on every cosmic-scale threat that has pointed itself at this planet and been turned back by willpower and genius, and a statistically improbable series of last-minute heroics. The problem is not that Rogers is naive. The problem is that he is reasoning from data that does not include this, and this has always been different. The framework that has worked every time before, heroes, response, solution, is about to meet the specific entity for whom that framework has never once applied. You are standing on a fire escape in Queens at 0918 UTC, coffee going cold in your hand, looking at a sky that is subtly but completely wrong. The light is off. The shadows don't fall right. Your phone buzzes with emergency alerts you haven't opened. Your neighbor leans out her window, looks up, shrugs. "Aliens again," she says. Not a question, a classification. The exhausted pragmatism of a city that has survived enough of these to have developed a taxonomy. You almost say yes, almost reach for the framework. But something in the sky stops you. The way the new star sits there, perfectly still, performing patience. You don't say anything. You go inside. You won't finish the coffee. And in the back of your mind, in the part too honest for words, a thought forms and immediately gets pushed away. The last few times, the heroes found the plan's weakness. What happens when there isn't one? Before the chaos begins, we need rules. The single biggest mistake a story like this can make is letting the threat stay vague, letting the power levels feel arbitrary, the whole thing dissolving into the shapeless fan argument that fills comment sections but never satisfies anyone. So here is the baseline on both sides. Marvel, modern composite, full roster, full awareness, every asset assembled across a decade of increasingly catastrophic wake-up calls. Wakanda's technology, Strange's sorcery, Stark's network, the full weight of everything this planet has learned to build. On Frieza's side, and the power-scaling community needs to hold this, we begin at standard invasion posture. Not golden, not black, standard. The version his empire deploys when it wants to demonstrate capability without investing meaningful effort. The regional manager with a strongly worded letter. The regional manager can destroy a planet with one finger while bored. Earth is the small business. The letter is already in every speaker on the planet. At 10 o'clock UTC, 43 minutes after the signal, Frieza does something no invasion protocol Earth has ever written includes a procedure for. He requests a meeting, not demands, requests. Through a formal channel, his ship opens by simply overwriting the UN's secure communication satellite with his own frequency. A communique arrives simultaneously in the Secretary General's office, the Avengers compound, and 6 national security briefing rooms. It is a calendar invitation, scheduled for 1100 UTC, 1 hour's notice. An agenda is attached. 3 items: resource inventory confirmation, logistical timeline discussion, terms of efficient transition. No item 4, no military options discussion, no ceasefire framework. The agenda has the brisk, pre-decided quality of a meeting that has already concluded and is being held as a courtesy, so the minutes can reflect the other party was consulted. Tony Stark reads it, looks at Pepper, looks back. He sent a calendar invite. An alien conqueror sent a calendar invite. The conference has 41 participants and 1 chair that matters. The 41 are heads of state, intelligence directors, military chiefs, and 3 individuals who are technically not government representatives, but whose presence was insisted upon by enough others that excluding them became logistically complicated. Stark, Strange, and Rogers, who fills a room with moral authority simply by existing in it at the correct posture. The 1 chair that matters resolves on every screen simultaneously, a connection that should not be technically possible given the distance, and that is possible anyway because Frieza's systems operate on the same principle as his invasion methodology. Your infrastructure is a convenience, not a constraint. The room behind him looks like what would happen if a cathedral and a boardroom raised a child on absolute power and excel, and interior design. He occupies his chair with the relaxed authority of someone who has sat in thrones and found them adequately comfortable but not essential. Up close, the reaction in every room is the same. The cognitive dissonance of a threat this scale wearing a face, this composed. Frieza speaks first because waiting for the room to settle is something you do when you need the room's approval. and he has never once in his life needed it. He begins with Item 1, the resource inventory, and what follows is 6 minutes of the most technically precise and diplomatically catastrophic assessment Earth has ever been subjected to, delivered in the tone of a senior executive presenting quarterly results to a board with no vote. He knows the junction point coordinates, he knows the vault locations, he knows the artifact inventory with a specificity that makes Strange's expression do something complicated in the upper corner of his feed. The expression of someone calculating how that intelligence was gathered and arriving at answers he dislikes. When France's representative attempts to interrupt, Frieza reaches forward and taps one control on his armrest. Her audio disappears. He continues. The United States representative attempts to speak. Muted. The Secretary General. Muted. Rogers leans forward. With respect. Muted. Frieza finishes his sentence without looking up. Strange unmutes himself before anyone else and speaks with the flat precision of someone who has decided accuracy is the only useful currency in this room. He does not challenge the inventory. He does not make a speech about sovereignty or humanity's right to self-determination, not because he disagrees, but because he has read the agenda and understands it is not a negotiating document. He asks one question. 1. The intelligence behind your inventory. How long has the survey been running? The room goes quieter, which is notable because the room was already extremely quiet. Frieza looks at Strange for the first time in the conference with something other than administrative detachment, a slight focusing of attention, the way attention focuses when something unexpected enters the field. He says, after a pause precisely long enough to be deliberate. Long enough. Then, with what a careful observer might identify as the faintest genuine appreciation. The sorcerer. Good. I was hoping someone competent was listening. Stark speaks next with the repulsors on his right hand charged to 70%, which the suit's external sensors broadcast loudly enough that Frieza's ship registers and logs under locally interesting fauna, subtype, reactive. Tony does not point the repulsor at the screen. He's not an idiot. He charges it because charging it while talking is the specific body language he uses when he wants an opponent to know he is simultaneously the smartest and most dangerous person in the room without saying either thing directly. He looks at the screen. He looks at the mute control on the armrest because Tony Stark does not forget the mute control and will spend the next 14 hours building a counter-signal that overrides it. He says, "Here's my question. You've got enough firepower in that ship to skip the conversation entirely. So why the meeting? Why 48 hours? What's in it for an empire that could just take?" Frieza looks at Stark the way you look at a device demonstrating an unexpected function. He says, "Because destruction is wasteful, and waste," he straightens one cuff, "is the only thing I find genuinely offensive." The conference ends at 11:47 UTC because Frieza ends it with the same unilateral efficiency with which he muted 14 W's. World leaders mid-sentence. The final image on every screen before the connection closes is not his face. It is the agenda document with a notation added below, Item 3, response expected by 0917 UTC, Day 3. Non-responses interpreted as Item 3 acceptance by default. The screens go dark simultaneously. Rogers looks at Stark. Stark looks at Strange. Strange is looking at something that isn't in the room. The elsewhere gaze that means he is processing in a register requiring more than available ambient information. After 12 seconds of silence that feels considerably longer, Stark says, "He muted France." Rogers says, "Tony. I'm just noting, I know. He muted France and gave them homework." Strange, without looking away from his elsewhere, says, "The survey has been running since before the signal. The ship didn't arrive with the message. The message arrived because the survey was already complete." The worst detail about the conference, the one Strange returns to repeatedly in his notes over the following days, is not the muting, not the resource inventory, not even the casual demonstration that Frieza's intelligence on Earth's assets is months ahead of anything Earth's systems could generate about him. It is Item 3, terms of efficient transition, not conquest, not surrender, transition. The word of someone who has done this enough times to have developed preferred vocabulary for it, the way medicine standardizes terminology for things that happen regularly enough to need a name. Earth is not being invaded. Earth is being processed. and somewhere in the dimensional record that Strange's scan keeps brushing against without fully catching, in the background frequency that doesn't belong to Frieza's ship or Earth's sky or any source Strange has yet identified, something adjacent to all of this is present. Not Frieza, something else, something that was already here when the ship arrived, that the arrival has disturbed the way footsteps disturb very still water. He adds a note to the Sanctum archive at 12:30 UTC, after the debrief, after everyone else has left to begin the operational responses the conference has made urgent. 3 words. Find the laughter. Day 1, 14:32 UTC. Here is something the official after-action reports will document with clinical precision and completely fail to capture. The first response team is good. Not good in the relative sense. Genuinely, objectively, by every measurable standard of coordinated superhuman threat response, good. The formation breaks atmosphere at Mach 12 with the tight, purposeful efficiency of people who have beaten things that should have been unbeatable, and the collective confidence of that record is present in every comms exchange, every tactical call-out, every vector adjustment. Friday runs in real time. They have beaten gods. They have beaten artificial intelligences running on infinity stones. They have beaten a purple mathematician with a magic glove who wanted to delete half of everything. The problem, the specific irreversible load-bearing problem, is that confidence built on past victories is only valid until you meet something that wasn't in any of the previous victories. At 14:41 UTC, 800 meters from the outer hull of a ship the size of a small moon, the formation meets exactly that. It just doesn't know it yet. Iron Man reaches the approach corridor first. 17 suits running in parallel, repulsors charged at the frequency Friday calculated as optimal for the energy signature they are tracking. The tactical overlay runs 23 simultaneous threat assessments, cross-referencing every known alien combat profile against the vessel's hull composition, the signal's energy signature, the ATM, aspheric distortion readings building since 0917 UTC, 23 assessments, each one returning a variant of the same result in Friday's clean font. No match found. Recalibrating. Tony had built the recalibration protocol 4 years ago for genuinely novel threat profiles. It has never returned no match found 23 consecutive times without generating at least a partial classification. He stares at the 23rd result. He says quietly to himself, "Okay, so we're doing that." War Machine pulls alongside on the eastern vector. "Friday, giving you anything?" 23 ways of saying I don't know. Rhodes processes this. "That's new." "Yeah. How worried should I be?" Tony looks at the ship, at the scale of it, the absolute civic indifference of its mass. "I'll let you know in 4 minutes." The figure detaches from the vessel's surface at 14:43 UTC, and the cameras feeding every command post on Earth capture something that produces, in every room watching, the same sequence of reactions in the same order. First, scale confusion. The mind, primed by the ship's context, had prepared for something physically proportionate, vast, armored, architecturally threatening. The mind receives instead a figure that looks, against the vessel's absolute backdrop, almost slight, white and purple, horned, a tail moving with the slow, idle patience of something that has never once been in a hurry because hurry implies the possibility of being too late, and that possibility has never applied. Second, the face. When cameras zoom to resolution, the face breaks the analytical composure of every intelligence officer watching. Because it is not fury, not hunger, not the expression of a being preparing for confrontation, it is the specific, perfectly composed expression of a very senior executive who has been briefly interrupted during something more important and is allocating the minimum necessary attention to resolving the interruption before returning to it. He looks at the formation the way you look at a notification you didn't request. Thor speaks first, because Thor has several thousand years of experience meeting powerful beings in open space, and his instinct is always toward direct engagement, toward the possibility that grandeur recognizes grandeur, and a negotiation opens. He raises Mjolnir and lets the lightning speak before the words do. The storm that answers him is real, honest, the full reach of the son of Odin calling down what the sky owes him, crossing 800 meters in the fraction of a second that lightning takes because lightning does not negotiate with distance. What happens next happens in a time frame that Friday's sensors catch and that human perception, watching slowed playback afterward, still struggles to process. Frieza tilts his head. 1 inch. Left. The lightning passes through the space his head had occupied and continues into the void behind him, and he watches it go with the expression of someone observing a weather phenomenon that is locally interesting but not personally relevant. Then he looks back at Thor. The head returns to its original position, and Thor, who has fought Surtur and Hela and Thanos, experiences something he has not experienced in approximately 1,000 years. The cognitive dissonance of having committed everything and registered as insufficient before the response has even begun. Iron Man engages at 1444 UTC, 17 suits converging in the pattern Tony spent 3 weeks designing after the Thanos engagement. Distributed simultaneous impact, no single point of origin, force spread across a target profile in a way that allows no single defensive response to address all of it at once. By any engineering standard, it is beautiful. A genuine piece of tactical artistry built by a genuine genius who incorporated every previous lesson. The collective energy output hits Frieza with force that should crack the surface of a small moon. Frieza raises one hand, not defensively, not to block. The way you raise a hand to check the time. The repulsor energy hits him and distributes across his body, and he looks at his hand, mildly, then looks at Tony. Friday says, in a voice stripped of its usual modulated calm, "Sir, the impact registered on his surface temperature as +2 degrees. Tony stares at the readout. 2 degrees. Yes, sir. 17 suits. Yes, sir. A pause. Is he dusting off his shoulder? Friday processes the camera feed. He is dusting off his shoulder, sir. Another pause, longer. Friday, in your assessment, I would not recommend a second volley on the current hypothesis, sir. Spider-Man swings out of the Quinjet's secondary bay at 1451 UTC on a web line catching the edge of an external strut, momentum depositing him at the formation's edge with the cheerful kinetic efficiency of someone who has been doing this long enough for it to feel natural. He looks at Thor breathing hard. He looks at 17 suits in reassessment mode. He looks at the ship. He looks at the figure floating in front of the ship more closely. The figure looks back with the expression of someone noticing a new variable and finding it adequately inconsequential. Peter says, to the general comms vicinity, "Guys, I missed the bus, did we?" He processes the formation's posture. Did we not win? Why is the short white guy just floating there? Is that... The specific focused squint of someone running a genuine visual comparison. Is that Mewtwo? 3 full seconds of silence. Then Tony. Parker. Peter. I'm just asking. Get into position. Okay, but the tail is very similar, Mr. Stark, that's all I'm saying. Frieza looks at Spider-Man and something shifts in his expression. Faint, genuine curiosity. Not about power level, not about threat assessment. About the comment. In 400 years of planetary acquisition operations, across dozens of civilizations and hundreds of first contact engagements, no indigenous life form has ever compared him to anything. He files this. Then he addresses Peter with the calm, comprehensive attention of a naturalist observing a new specimen. You move like a monkey, but you dress like a clown. Are you this planet's court jester? Peter tilts his head. Hey, I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Beat. And you're what? The friendly neighborhood galactic dictator? Frieza's expression does something at the word neighborhood. Registers it, the way a quality control system flags unexpected input for secondary review. I own 76 planets. I do not have a neighborhood. Peter, then you should really consider downsizing. Studies show... I shall enjoy pulling your legs off, Frieza says, with the flat conversational delivery of someone commenting on the weather. Do you have 8? Or is the costume a misrepresentation? The tone changes at 1458 UTC, not with a battle cry or a dramatic rupture, but with Frieza raising one finger. 1, the gesture of a conductor indicating a single note. 200 kilometers behind the formation, Watchtower 7, SHIELD Orbital Defense Platform, Unmayat, and operational for 4 years, rated sufficient against a Chitauri mothership-class vessel. Stops existing. Not exploded. Not destroyed in the kinetic sense that destroyed implies. Stops existing the way a word stops existing when you delete it from a document. Clean. Complete. The sensors register the energy output for 1.3 seconds. Then nothing, because there is nothing. Friday. Flags it, runs verification, confirms. The platform is gone, the energy output is unclassified, and the reading on the figure who raised one finger is still after 17 suits and Thor's full storm, returning recalibrating. The 11 minutes that follow are everything the formation has. Thor at full capacity, Iron Man's complete network, War Machine's full payload. Frieza moves through it the way water moves through a conversation, present, incorporated, entirely unbothered. And when it ends, he is exactly where the engagement started. He turns back toward the vessel, not fleeing, returning. Then he stops, once, looks at Tony specifically. The armor, remarkable biology, terrible engineering. A pause. Improve the power source, you'll need it. He continues toward the vessel. Tony stares at the space where he'd been. Did he just give me homework? Roads, damage flags running across his own systems. Tony. The alien who deleted a satellite with one finger gave me engineering notes. Rhodes considers this. Are they good notes? Tony looks at the power source readout, at the 43%, at the recalibration still running, still returning no match. He says, very quietly, yeah, they're good notes. Day 2, 0600 UTC. Here is something empires which have been doing this for centuries understand that the civilizations they process almost never do until it's too late. The first engagement is never the strategy. The first engagement is the diagnostic. It answers one question only, not can we win, because that was answered before the ship arrived. But what does winning cost here? What resources does this acquisition require? What is the resistance coefficient? The 11 minutes at 14:32 UTC yesterday were not a battle. They were a blood test, and the results are now in Frieza's ledger, analyzed, categorized, filed under a column that translates as something between manageable and mildly stimulating. So while Earth spent the night debriefing, arguing, evacuating, and posting about it, Frieza spent the night doing what Frieza does after a diagnostic returns acceptable parameters. He sent the next phase, not an assault, a securing action. The difference between an assault and a securing action is the difference between a demolition crew and a moving crew. One destroys what's there. The other makes sure what's valuable doesn't go anywhere before it can be collected. The Ginyu Force materialized in Times Square at 0617 UTC, and the manner of their arrival was characteristic of everything they were. 5 figures dropping from a transport beam in a cascade of light that was objectively more theatrical than the situation required, landing in a formation that was less a tactical deployment and more a choreographed group photograph. The Ginyu Force did not arrive in locations. They presented themselves to locations. Captain Ginyu understood this better than anyone alive, which was why he had spent considerable personal time developing the specific landing formation they now held in the middle of Times Square. A pose conveying authority, menace, physical confidence, and a flamboyant commitment to aesthetics that most military units would find professionally embarrassing and that the Ginyu Force had long ago elevated to something approaching martial philosophy. Times Square receives them the way Times Square receives everything, with the exhausted, slightly glazed acceptance of a location that has processed too much spectacle to register any single instance as particularly remarkable. 3 shy ELD field agents maintaining perimeter since 0400 UTC looked at the 5 figures, looked at the poses, looked at each other. Senior Agent Torres, 12-year veteran of the Battle of New York, keyed her comms. Command, we have 5 hostiles in the square. They appear to be posing. Command said, posing. Torres said, like a calendar shoot. Command was quiet for 3 seconds. Are they a threat? Torres watched Birder vibrate with barely contained kinetic energy. Unclear, but they're committed to it. Deadpool arrived 9 minutes later and was, in the specific context of the Ginyu Force's arrival, the variable no tactical briefing had accounted for, and that in retrospect everyone should have anticipated because Deadpool is always the variable no briefing accounts for. He dropped from a building ledge, rolled, spun, and landed in a standing position that was objectively and undeniably a pose. Right arm extended, left hand on hip, chin up, the posture of committed theatrical certainty. Jeese, mid-hold of his own formation, turned his head involuntarily. Deadpool looked at the Ginyu Force. Something passed between them immediately. The acknowledgement of one group of deeply committed aesthetic practitioners by another. Deadpool said, "Okay, I need to be in this." Captain Ginyu, without breaking his pose, "This is an elite formation. Entry requires demonstrated commitment." Deadpool executed a move. Ginyu watched it. Something in his body language shifted. The Ginyu Force equivalent of respect. "Your hip placement is unconventional, Deadpool. I prefer avant-garde." Ginyu, "Your left arm needs work." Deadpool, "I have notes." Torres, watching from the perimeter, keyed her comms again. "Command, the merc with a mouth is now collaborating with the alien posing unit. Request clarification on whether posing back constitutes an official tactical response." Command did not respond for 11 seconds. "Stand by." Strange assembled the full picture at 09 Hunquak UTC on day 2, 14 hours after the conference. 3 hours after the Ginyu Force's arrival had added operational confusion he was setting aside because it was, in the broader context of what he now understood, almost irrelevant. He spread everything across the Sanctum's archive table, the junction point data, the vault coordinates from the conference agenda, the atmospheric distortion readings from day 1, the survey drone detection logs Friday had forwarded, 12 fragments of cosmic cartography from the archive's deepest stacks, the civilization records that ended in ways correlating with the methodology he was now seeing clearly for the first time as a complete system. He stood at the table for a long time without moving, in the specific stillness of someone whose mind is running at a speed the body accommodates by going very quiet. Then he called the Avengers. Not with urgency, with the flat, pre-decided tone of someone who has finished deliberating. He said, "I need everyone in the Sanctum in 30 minutes, not for a briefing, for a reclassification." They came. Rogers, Stark, Banner, Thor still carrying the weight of yesterday's 11 minutes in his posture, Danvers who had arrived from space at 07 Hunka UTC and had not yet fully powered down, the golden light of binary still present at her edges in the Sanctum's dimmer interior. Strange waited until everyone was in the room. Then, without preamble, "He's not here for Earth." The room processed this. Stark. He sent a 48-hour clock. As a survey completion window, no, at a conquest timeline. Strange activated the archive table, the full map, the coordinates, the junction point, the network. Earth sits at the intersection of 4 cosmic transit lanes, dimensional pathways that function, at the scale Frieza's empire operates on, as logistics infrastructure. Trade routes, supply lines. The artifacts he named are components of a spatial mechanics framework that, assembled correctly, allows those lanes to be accessed, controlled, and redirected. He paused. He doesn't want the planet, he wants the address. Danvers said, "So we're not a target, we're a location." "You're an address," Strange said, "and someone just decided it's prime real estate." Rogers asks the question that defines everything which follows, in the way Rogers asks difficult questions. Directly, without diplomatic cushioning. In the clear, slightly bleak tone of someone who has decided not asking is more dangerous than asking. If he wants the network, if this is cosmic logistics, then we can't just punch the objective, so what's the play? Strange lays out 3 options with the flat precision of someone who has run the scenarios and knows which he prefers without being willing to say so yet. Maximum force engagement before the clock expires. Gambling the first response's data was incomplete, and a full coordinated strike changes the math. Diplomatic contact through cosmic intermediaries. The Sorcerer Supreme reaching entities Frieza's empire would recognize as peer level. Or a third option. Strange describes in 2 words and then says nothing for a long moment. Controlled disclosure. Make this not Earth's problem, but a universal one. Tell the cosmic community loudly. The room does not love any option. It especially does not love the third because saying it out loud makes it irreversible, makes it an admission that Earth cannot handle this alone, which everyone already knows and which saying aloud transforms from a private calculation into a formal position. Stark looks at Strange. "You already know which one you want." Strange says, "I know which one is correct." "Those aren't always the same." "No," Strange says. "They're not." The political fracture that has been building since the signal opens visibly at 10 o'clock UTC on day 2, not with a dramatic announcement but the way structural damage announces itself, quietly, in a place nobody was watching, and by the time it's visible it's already load-bearing. A coalition of 11 nations releases a joint statement that does not use the word negotiation but uses 4 words arranged in a sequence that technically doesn't. What it says, stripped of diplomatic upholstery. Perhaps some terms are worth discussing. 3 other nations condemn it within 40 minutes. Those condemnations are condemned within 2 hours. The UN, which has spent 9 hours maintaining unified positioning, fractures along lines that have always existed but have never been stress-tested by the pressure of a planetary-scale entity with a 48-hour clock and demonstrated capacity to delete orbital infrastructure with one finger. Tony Stark, who knows about all 3 fractures because Tony Stark always knows, sits in a corner of the sanctum watching Strange's map with the expression of someone running 3 simultaneous arguments in his head and losing all of them. In the Chicago shelter, a family sits around a battery-powered radio that switches mid-sentence from emergency instructions to a commentator explaining, in apparent good faith, that the whole thing might be a misidentified atmospheric phenomenon. The father turns the radio off. The mother turns it back on. Their daughter, 7 years old, is drawing something with a crayon. A drawing of a star, blocky and earnest, the kind a child draws when trying to represent something she has seen but doesn't yet have vocabulary for. She holds it up. Is this what it looks like? The father looks at the drawing, at the blocky innocent star, at his daughter's face which contains no fear, only the focused curiosity of someone working through a problem through the making of something. He says, "Yeah, baby, that's what it looks like." She goes back to drawing. The radio gives nothing useful. The sky gives nothing at all. And in the sanctum, Strange looks at his map and understands that the strategy has to change, because you cannot defend an address by guarding it. You can only change what the address means. He has less than 14 hours before the survey window closes. He begins. Day 2, 12:47 UTC. Operation Meridian has a name, which is how you know it was assembled by people who needed to believe it was real enough to have one. 3 simultaneous vectors, coordinated to the second, built on a single foundational assumption that Strange has stress-tested from every angle and believes is correct. Frieza is still in survey mode, still calculating, still treating this as a resource acquisition with an acceptable cost margin rather than a situation requiring his full attention. The assumption is that there is a difference between Frieza engaged and Frieza performing, that the 11-minute demonstration was theater, calibrated contempt, and that somewhere beneath the performance is a calculating mind that responds to cost-benefit analysis the way all calculating minds do. Raise the cost high enough, fast enough, and the calculation changes. The plan does not require defeating him. It requires making Earth expensive. Strange has built the entire architecture around that single word, expensive. It is a good word. It is about to meet the specific person for whom the concept of expensive does not apply in the way Strange is using it, because Frieza's empire has been doing this for centuries, and the one thing centuries of planetary acquisition teaches you is exactly how to recognize when someone is trying to make you feel a cost you cannot actually feel. The Atlantic team reaches the junction point at 12:54 UTC in a retrofitted submarine Stark modified over 18 hours with equipment the lead engineer describes as functional, the physicist they brought describes as theoretically coherent, and Strange describes simply as sufficient, which is the word he uses when he means it will work, and please stop asking why. The destabilization sequence runs for 11 minutes. It works. The junction point becomes what Strange called temporarily less useful, which the instruments confirm and which buys, by his estimate, 6 to 18 hours depending on how sophisticated Frieza's survey equipment is. The team allows itself 4 seconds of grim professional satisfaction, the feeling of having done a difficult thing correctly. Then the instruments register a new reading from above the surface, that energy signature, the one that keeps requiring recalibration, and the 4 seconds end so completely it's almost impressive. The vault team confirms the survey drones at 12:58 UTC, and Shuri cracks one open in 40 minutes that feel like 4. The timestamp on its operational log showing 09:23 UTC on day 1, 6 minutes after the signal, before anyone on Earth began formally responding. He had been mapping while introducing himself. The courtesy, the 48-hour clock, the agenda with its 3 careful items, all of it running simultaneously with a survey that was, at that point, mostly complete. The ledger had been opened before the first word of the message was delivered. Shuri looks at the timestamp for a long time. Then she says, with the flat delivery of someone whose emotional response to information is to immediately convert it into tactical implications. He already knows where everything is. The vault defense is performative. The room absorbs this. Then why are we doing it? A general asks. Because what we show him about how we defend it is still information he doesn't have. We're not protecting the artifacts. We're controlling what the survey learns about our response protocols. The general looks at her. That's Strange's idea, she says. Obviously. Strange and Rogers reach the vessel's outer approach at 1300 UTC exactly, and Strange disables every sensor in the corridor before they enter. A decision that will be questioned extensively in every debrief that follows, and that Strange will decline to fully explain, saying only that some negotiations require the dignity of privacy. What is known is that contact is made. What is known is that it lasts 41 minutes. What Rogers later describes in the single conversation with Stark that both agree not to document is this. It wasn't a negotiation. Strange spent 40 minutes reading something, and at the end of it, he looked like a man who had found the last page of a book and discovered the ending was built into the first chapter the entire time without making it visible. When Strange comes back, he sits in the Quinjet for 6 minutes by himself, which the people who know him recognize as Strange processing something that requires more than his usual processing time. Then he delivers the debrief. One piece of information that the room has to hear twice before it lands. Frieza was not aware of Marvel's full cosmic hierarchy before this invasion. He knows now. Strange told him. His response was, "How delightful. This changes the timeline considerably." Not deterred, interested. The survey just got bigger. The sky breaks at 1300 UTC on the nose, and Friday renders the new energy reading as a string of digits filling the HUD from edge to edge, and then, after a pause lasting 0.003 seconds, appends 4 words in clean font below them. Reference scale unavailable. Tony looks at the 4 words. He looks at the digits above them. He says, "Friday." She says, "I know, sir." He says, "That reading would require..." "Yes, sir." "That's not possible." "I'm increasingly less confident in that category, sir." Frieza exits the vessel and the movement is different. Not the idle drift of day 1, not the composed territorial patience of something performing confidence for an audience it doesn't need. This is the deliberateness of a decision executing itself in real time. The sky changes as he moves through it. Not from clouds, from pressure, from the specific atmospheric physics of proximity to an energy output that the sky's constituent particles are registering and redistributing. At ground level, the light goes wrong. Not dark, wrong. The color relationships between objects subtly but completely altered, the way they alter in the seconds before a severe storm when the atmosphere is doing something normal physics doesn't do. Thor's lightning reaches ahead of his approach. Carol Danvers arrives from the solar side at a speed registering on the outer atmosphere as a second sunrise. The formation becomes the most concentrated application of force Earth's defenders have ever managed in a single coordinated moment. It is everything. The full deck, laid out exactly as Strange had predicted. Frieza wanted to see it. He transforms at 1303 UTC, and the transformation is nothing like what any of them expected, which is itself information. They had all built a mental image of escalation from him, something vast and loud that announced itself the way power announces itself when it wants acknowledgement. What happens instead is a stillness. Complete, absolute, total stillness where movement had been. And in that stillness, a change the sensors don't catch as a discrete event but as a shift in baseline. The way room temperature changes, not from a single source but from the entire room simultaneously deciding to be different. The gold comes first. Not Carol's bright solar gold, but something darker, richer, the gold of something very old that has spent a long time accumulating. Then the black, over the gold, through it, replacing it in a transition Friday's sensors record as 0.7 seconds, and that everyone present experiences as no time at all, as if the transformation had always been the destination and everything before it was the 0.7 seconds of approach. Black Frieza. The sky doesn't crack like thunder. It cracks like glass, because reality has finally decided this fight is too loud to ignore. Carol Danvers hits him at full binary output at 1304 UTC, and the impact registers on seismographs in 17 countries as a shallow, clean earthquake event. Tony's sensors catch the collision data and return numbers he stares at for the specific reason that staring at numbers you don't believe is sometimes the only honest response. Friday. Surface temperature differential on impact. +3 degrees, sir. Tony says nothing for 2 seconds. She hits harder than 17 suits and the differential is 1 degree more. Yes, sir. He's warmer. Yes, sir. Frieza looks at Carol Danvers with the expression of an engineer reviewing data confirming a hypothesis. Satisfied. Complete. He reaches out and catches her fist. Not blocking it. Catching it. The difference being the difference between meeting force and absorbing it. He holds it. He looks at the binary radiance of her at close range and says, in the same tone he used to discuss the UN agenda, "You glow, like a light bulb." Carol, pulling against the grip with the full output of a stellar-class energy being, says through her teeth, "Let go." Frieza tilts his head. "But light bulbs," he says, "break." The engagement lasts 41 minutes and ends not because a plan succeeds, but because Frieza decides it ends. Because something in his calculation reaches a conclusion, because the survey has what it needs, and the demonstration has delivered its revised message. He returns to the vessel. No speech, no ultimatum revision, simply moving back with the deliberate quality of someone closing a notebook. He stops once, looks at Tony's suit. The damage assessment running, 6 system failures, 38% power, the 4th generation arc reactor he built in 36 hours since day 1 running at the new output. "You improved the power source," Frieza says. Tony's voice very flat. "You told me to." "You're faster than I projected," Frieza says. A pause precisely long enough. "Noted." Then he enters the vessel, and the running lights shift and the engines change frequency in the specific way that engines change when they move from holding position to preparing for something else entirely. In the shelter in Chicago, the power flickers, recovers, and the 7-year-old puts down her crayon and puts her hand in her father's. He holds it. On the wall, her drawing of the star watches them from its tape. Outside, the wrong-colored sky pulses once. A single deep, slow pulse of light moving through the atmosphere like a breath, like something enormous exhaling. And in every shelter, every bunker, every living room with a feed still running, the screens go white. 3 seconds of nothing, then they come back. And in those 3 seconds of white, something settles into every room that isn't fear. Fear was already there, but something underneath it, more structural. The recognition that the plan has run. That expensive was a good word that met the wrong person, and that the figure re-entering the vessel is not retreating. He is revising. Day 2, 1400 UTC, 16 minutes after the engagement ends. Here is what the official record shows. Frieza returns to the vessel, the formation regroups, damage assessments run, Strange and Rogers return from the approach corridor, the timeline holds at its original parameters. Technically accurate, completely insufficient as a description of what is actually happening, which is this. Frieza has updated the ledger, not the survey ledger, the operational one. The one that the 48-hour clock and the resource inventory and the conference agenda were all feeding into, the one that produces the final column determining what Phase 3 looks like. Phase 3 has 2 options. Option 1, controlled extraction. Remove the components, establish network access, depart. Resource cost, low. Timeline, efficient. Yield, acceptable. Option 2, liquidation. Remove the resistance variable entirely. Extract under 0 opposition conditions. Resource cost, moderate. Timeline, slightly extended. Yield, clean. The junction point destabilization pushed the margin. The engagement's energy expenditure pushed it further, and the survey drone that Shuri cracked and timestamped, the one that told Earth the survey began before the message, that drone Frieza knows was cracked. Which means Earth knows what he knows. Assets that know what you know are not controllable assets. They are, in the cold vocabulary of the ledger, liabilities. The ledger has been updated. The column recommends option 2. The death ball is already forming. Tony sees it on sensors at 1403 UTC, and the reading is so geometrically precise, so absolutely unambiguous in its intent, that Friday doesn't flag it as requiring interpretation. She says, in the voice she uses when the situation has moved beyond the register where tone modulation serves any purpose. Sir, he's charging a planetary destruction technique. Tony looks at the perfect sphere of condensed energy forming above the vessel. Small still, relative to what it will become, the way a wave is small relative to what it becomes when the ocean behind it finishes deciding. The sensor data shows the growth rate, the projected yield, the estimated deployment window. Friday renders the projected impact radius in a highlight color she has never used in any previous threat assessment, because no previous threat assessment required it. Tony says, "How long?" 11 minutes at current charge rate, sir. Can we? No, sir. If we hit it now, the destabilization energy would accelerate the charge. Revised timeline, 4 minutes. Tony closes the tactical overlay, opens it again. The reading is unchanged. Friday, give me something. She pauses. 0.003 seconds. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not finding something. Strange has been in the sanctum since 1350 UTC, 13 minutes before the death ball begins forming, because Strange read the ledger update before the ledger updated, felt it in the dimensional fabric the way he feels everything that matters slightly before instruments catch it. He did not go back to the vessel. He did not go to the staging area. He went to the sanctum, to the archive, to the specific section he has been building toward since 0914 UTC on day 1, when he felt something adjacent to the arrival that he filed under Find the Laughter. He found it during the 41 minutes in the approach corridor, traced the frequency, identified the dimensional signature, understood the specific quality of presence that belonged to something observing from outside the frame, had understood what it was, and had understood with the specific quality of understanding that produces not relief, but a very cold, very clear, very load-bearing calm, what the only move was, not a spell of defense, not a dimensional barrier or a mirror universe redirect, something older, something that operated in the register Frieza's ledger had no column for because it had never encountered a civilization with access to it. Strange opened the archive. He found the correct page. He began writing not a spell, but a petition, a formal statement in the language that cosmic authority recognizes as binding, filed through the dimensional architecture he has spent a career learning to navigate. It required 3 things: knowledge of the correct address, which he had, a formal statement in the correct language, which he could produce, and what the archive's translated fragment described as an honest declaration of what is at stake. Strange read that 3rd requirement 4 times. Then he wrote it. Carol Danvers is already moving before the comms catch up, pushing to full binary without transition. No ramp up, direct ceiling. Because she felt the forming sphere's pressure the way her energy absorption ability processes destructive output as information. The light she produces in the upper atmosphere is briefly the 2nd brightest thing in the sky. She burns toward the sphere with the focused, furious intention of someone who has decided the gap between what she can do and what the situation requires is not a reason to stop, but a reason to go faster. Thor falls in beside her, lightning running ahead of his approach. War Machine locks every targeting system on the sphere simultaneously. Rogers on the ground, because Rogers is always most useful on the ground, which he has never entirely accepted but has learned to work with, looks up at the forming sphere, at the 2 points of light burning toward it, and says on the private channel, very quietly, "Strange, whatever you're doing, now would be the time." The death ball reaches 60% charge at 1411 UTC, and the gravitational effect is measurable at ground level. A faint, persistent wrongness in the weight of things, the sensation of standing on a floor that has developed a subtle lean. In the Chicago shelter, the father feels it as pressure in his ears, like altitude change, like descent. His daughter puts down her crayon. She doesn't say anything. She puts her hand in his. Carol hits the sphere at 1413 UTC at full binary output, and the impact produces a shockwave the sensors register. The sphere absorbs it and continues charging. Thor hits it at 1414 UTC, and the lightning disperses across its surface in patterns that are genuinely beautiful and that change the charge rate by 0. The formation looks at the sphere. The sphere continues. Frieza watches from the vessel's exterior with the composed attention of someone overseeing a standard operational procedure, not gloating, not speechifying, not doing any of the theatrical things that villains do in stories because stories require theater, and he has never confused himself with a character in one. He is doing what the ledger requires. Option 2 is in progress. The timeline is 8 minutes, and in 8 minutes the column closes and the entry reads, resolved. Option 2, Q4, and the fleet moves to the next coordinate. Then something happens. His own senses, ancient, comprehensive, calibrated across Senos, Turis, register something approximately 1 second before his instruments do, which is itself the first anomaly, because Frieza's senses have not preceded his instruments in a very long time. The something is a silence, not an absence of sound, a quality of silence. The specific silence that exists when something very large has directed its attention at a specific point and everything in the vicinity has instinctively, structurally, without conscious decision, gone quiet. Frieza goes still. He looks at the silence. He says to no one, in a voice he has not used since the last time he encountered something that preceded his instruments. What is that? There is no visual announcement, no rift in the sky. No dimensional tear, no dramatic rupture giving the cameras something cinematic to transmit. One moment the space beside the vessel is only the space beside the vessel, and then it contains something additional, something the cameras cannot fully resolve because it is not operating in a register cameras are designed to capture. What Friday registers is an energy signature, small, impossibly small. Smaller than a human being, smaller than anything that is registered on any sensor in the entire engagement, and yet the reference scale that has been returning unavailable for Frieza since day 1 returns. For this new reading, something different, not a number. 3 words. Scale exceeds framework. Tony stares at it. Friday. That reading? Yes, sir. It's smaller than yes, sir. But the scale readout says yes, sir. Tony looks at the visual feed. At the small figure the cameras are struggling to resolve, around whom the atmosphere is handling itself with a kind of careful structural deference, the way water moves carefully around something very dense. He says, "That's not possible." Friday says, "I've largely stopped using that category, sir." Zeno is not angry. This is important. Zeno angry is a thing with consequences that rewrites the historical record of the universes it occurs in, and what is present beside Frieza's vessel is not that. What is present is Zeno at the floor of his response, which is, in some ways, more unsettling, looking like a small, unassuming figure in a simple outfit with large eyes currently directed at Frieza, with the patient, mildly inconvenienced expression of someone who has come downstairs to address a noise complaint and would prefer to return to what they were doing. The Grand Priest stands 2 steps behind, in the posture of attentive attendance, maintaining professional composure with the dedication of someone whose job description requires it regardless of the scale of what is happening around them. The death ball, at 72% charge, stops charging. Not because anyone stopped it, because the atmosphere around it has developed the same careful structural deference present everywhere within a certain radius of this small figure, and energy inside an atmosphere practicing deference does not continue to build the way energy normally builds. It simply waits, like everything else. Frieza looks at Zeno. Zeno looks at Frieza. And in every shelter, every command post, every living room where feeds are still running, the same thing happens. The screens go quiet in a way that screens do not go quiet, carrying the specific silence of a moment that understands its own weight. Zeno says, "Nay, Frieza, you came to this place. Not a question. Frieza goes very still. The stillness of a recalculation, of a ledger encountering a column it did not know existed. Your Highness, I was not aware. You were loud, Zeno says. I was watching my marbles. You were loud in the marble. I apologize for the... You didn't ask. 4 seconds of silence. No, I did not. These, my toys, Zeno says, with the specific, uncomplicated possessiveness of a child who has found someone playing with something from their collection without permission. You are playing with my toys. Frieza looks at the death ball's former position. It has dissipated, no command given, simply gone the way things go when the atmosphere around them stops cooperating. He looks at the formation, still, very still. All of them doing the thing that beings with genuine self-preservation instinct do when the scale of what they're in the presence of exceeds all prior reference points. Very little, very carefully. He looks at the vessel, at the ledger, at the survey data, the vault coordinates, the junction point, the 4 transit lanes, all of it. He looks at Zeno one more time. Zeno is already looking elsewhere, at something internal, tracking it with the uncomplicated attention of a child who has handled an interruption and returned to more interesting business. Frieza straightens one cuff. He says to the vessel's communication system in the crisp, professional tone of a CEO communicating a strategic pivot to his logistics department, recall the Ginyu force, log the survey data, mark the coordinates as complicated, adjust the Q4 projections. A pause. We will revisit. The vessel departs at 1447 UTC. No speech, no revised ultimatum. It simply accelerates and is gone, the way you leave a location when you have everything you came for and staying longer is not in the schedule. The sky is just sky again. The wrong-colored quality evaporates. The light returns to normal. The birds come back within the hour. Zeno, before departing, and his departure is as clean as his arrival. Present, then not present, no cinematic grammar, simply gone. Looks at the planet below one final time, at the blue of it, at the pretty lights that have faded now that the loudness has resolved. He says to the Grand Priest, in the tone he uses when noting something for future reference without urgency, "It's a good marble." Then he is gone. Strange in the sanctum receives confirmation of his petition's receipt at 1451 UTC and sits with it for a long time. He thinks about revisit, the specific word Frieza used in his final instruction, the word Strange's translation ability caught and filed, not abandoned, not closed file, revisit. In the vocabulary of an empire measuring time in centuries, revisit means the ledger entry is deferred, complicated but not resolved. An address that produced unexpected variables is still an address. He writes one entry in the archive before anything else, before the debriefs, before the political calls, before any of it. The petition worked or coincided with something working, and the distinction between those two things is currently the most important open question I have. The vessel is gone. The file is deferred. Zeno said good marble, and I am choosing to take it as a compliment. The work now is understanding what we have to do to stay one. He closes the archive. He makes tea. He drinks it standing up, watching the normal sky through the sanctum's window, and thinks about the word revisit the way you think about a word that is both the best possible outcome and the beginning of the next problem simultaneously. Which is what it is, which is what it will remain. For as long as Earth is visible, and the ledger is open, and the marble keeps turning in the light of a universe that has decided, for now, that it is good. Day 3, 08 Hunquak UTC. 38 hours after the vessel departs, 17 hours after the birds come back, Earth does something it has never done in its entire recorded history of alien invasions, divine interventions, and reality-threatening cosmic events. It argues about what to call what just happened. Not the strategic argument. Not the command rooms and intelligence briefings and after-action reports already being written in 12 languages. The cultural argument. The one happening on social media and in coffee shops and on public transit between strangers who would normally never speak. The specific conversation that starts when a shared experience has been large enough and strange enough and unresolved enough that the need to name it overrides social convention entirely. What do you call 48 hours in which a galactic empire arrived, surveyed your assets, prepared to liquidate your planet, and left because something that looked like a child with large eyes told it the noise was too loud? What category does that go in? The answer, which Earth arrives at collectively and without coordination over the following 72 hours, is none of the existing ones. So Earth does what Earth always does when existing frameworks fail. It builds new ones. Some are accurate, most are not. All of them reveal something true about the people building them, which is perhaps the most useful thing a new framework can do. The footage exists. 17 seconds of it, captured from 4 separate camera sources. 2 news drones, 1 SHIELD orbital relay somehow still operational during the engagement's electromagnetic interference, and 1 civilian smartphone operated by a man named Ahmed, who had been on his apartment roof in Queens because, as he later told the interviewer, "I needed to see it with my own eyes, and I was right that I did, and also wrong about what that would feel like." What the footage shows across all 4 sources is an imprecise but undeniable shape. Small, unassuming. Present beside the vessel for 14 seconds and then not present. The departure as clean and unannounced as the arrival. The anchors describe it differently. The analysts describe it differently. The official SHIELD report classifies it as unidentified entity, cosmic tier, intervention status, apparent and then runs out of classification language and files the remainder under SE Appendix D, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of a shrug. What the internet calls it, within 48 hours of the footage circulating, is the Xeno glitch, named partly for the shape of what the cameras caught and partly for what the footage does to every device that plays it. A brief, sourceless, completely inexplicable one-frame flicker of a bright, simple color that no one can agree on the exact shade of, that appears nowhere in the surrounding footage, and that 3 separate digital forensics teams confirm is not a compression artifact, not a lens effect, not a data corruption event. It is simply there, in every copy, on every device. The internet does not find this frightening. It finds it fascinating. The Daily Bugle's front page on day 3 carries a headline that becomes, in the retrospectives and cultural analyses of the period, either the most perfectly representative artifact of its era or the most perfectly representative artifact of J. Jonah Jameson's specific relationship with reality, depending on who is doing the analysis. The headline reads, in 72-point type, Spider-Man brought the aliens. The subheadline, also, what is the space toddler, and why won't the government tell us? The article, written by Jameson himself at 3 a.m. with the focused conviction of a man who has found his through line and will not let facts complicate it, argues with internally consistent but externally unsupported logic that Spider-Man's high-profile activities had functioned as a cosmic advertisement, a signal to the wider universe that Earth harbored unusual individuals, directly attracting the survey mission. The article does not address the counter-argument that Frieza's survey data had clearly been assembled through intelligence operations predating Spider-Man's public debut by a significant margin, because Jameson has not read the intelligence briefings, because the intelligence briefings are classified at a level that assumes their contents will remain classified and has not accounted for the specific tenacity of a man who has been blaming Spider-Man since 2012. Peter Parker reads the headline on his phone on a fire escape and says to no one, "I was literally there trying to help." A pause. He called me a clown. Frieza called me a clown and Jameson still found a way to make it my fault. He looks at the headline one more time. I'm going to write a letter. He does not write the letter. He goes on patrol. Some things do not change. Strange spends day 3 and day 4 in the archive, which is where he spends the days requiring the most thinking, because the archive is where the thinking has the most to work with. What he is working toward is not a tactical assessment. He filed that on day 2, and it contained everything it needed to. What he is working toward is the question the tactical assessment cannot address. What does good marble mean, operationally, going forward? Because Xeno said it with the specific casual affection of something that has noticed something and found it worth keeping, and worth keeping in the vocabulary of the most powerful entity Strange has ever encountered through dimensional record or direct contact is not a guarantee of protection. It is a disposition, a leaning, an orientation that exists as long as the marble remains interesting. By the end of day 4, he has eliminated 9 of 14 hypotheses, and the 5 remaining share one element he keeps arriving at from different angles. Earth was unpredictable in the specific way that things containing genuine novelty are unpredictable. Not random, not chaotic, but genuinely surprising, capable of producing variables that the most comprehensive survey could not anticipate. The junction point destabilization. The petition. Deadpool being incorporated into the Ginyu Forces formatio, in rotation. The 7-year-old's drawing. The man who asked if Frieza was Mewtwo. Strange writes the conclusion in the archive and then writes a second line beneath it. The marble stays interesting by continuing to produce surprises. The moment it becomes fully predictable, fully mapped, fully cataloged, fully understood, it stops being a good marble. It becomes a resource. He underlines resource. He thinks about the ledger. He thinks about revisit. Tony Stark does not sleep for 41 hours following the departure, which is not for Tony Stark a particularly notable data point. He has a long, well-documented relationship with not sleeping that Pepper has accurately categorized as a coping mechanism with an infrastructure problem. The infrastructure in this case is the workshop, which has accumulated over 5 days, the specific archaeology of focused crisis work, coffee cups in various states of completion arranged by apparent urgency, holographic displays running 17 parallel processes, and on the central workbench, in the position of primary focus, the visible system's live scan results, clean, routine, the quiet operational hum of a detection network doing its job in the absence of anything to detect. He is not building tonight. He is reading. The pile of reports, assessments, analyses, and requests for comment that have accumulated since the departure, triaged by Friday into priority tiers. He has read Strange's petition filing summary. He has read Shuri's drone timestamp analysis. He has read Reyes's 3 pages from the hospital 3 times and flagged them with a priority marker he has never used before. He has read the child psychologist's paper about children who now look at the sky as something requiring monitoring rather than background context. He has been running underneath all the reading a calculation he has not shared because he is not ready to share something unfinished. A calculation about the gap between what visible can currently detect and what an informed second survey will be designed to evade. The gap is not comfortable. He adds a note to the visible development file at 02 Honquak UTC. The objective isn't catching the scout. The objective is making the scout's data useless when it arrives. Strange's expensive address concept isn't a metaphor. It's an engineering brief. Start treating it like one. The paper the child psychologist publishes in week 2, the one 3 intelligence agencies flag as relevant to national security, has a companion study that does not receive the same institutional attention, but that Strange reads carefully and annotates extensively. A sociological survey of adult responses to the xenoglitch footage across 11 countries and 14 demographic categories, asking one question in 17 phrasings that all mean the same thing. When you saw the footage, what did you feel? The responses converge under cluster analysis on 3 dominant profiles. First, relief, the physical quality of a held breath releasing, a braced impact not arriving. Second, scale awareness, not fear exactly, but the specific recalibration of self-understanding that happens when you discover the thing you thought was the ceiling is actually the floor. Third, smallest but most persistent in follow-up surveys, affection. People who saw the footage and felt, without logical basis, an instinctive warmth toward the small figure with the large eyes who said, "Go away to a galactic emperor," the way you say it to someone blocking the television. The paper's authors note this third cluster with visible puzzlement, unable to account for it in existing frameworks for trauma response. Strange underlines it. He writes in the margin, "They recognize something, not what he is, what he did. He treated them like they mattered enough to be worth inconveniencing himself over. He underlines mattered." He adds a line to the archive. The distinction between protected and owned is going to matter enormously, and I need to understand it before the revisit. Reyes returns to work on day 7 and finds exactly what she expected. A room of people who have been doing the work continuously in her absence. Visible running its scans, the logs accumulating entries, the quiet operational routine of a detection network built for a threat that has temporarily departed and that everyone understands has not permanently resolved. She sits at her station. She opens the log and reads back through all existing entries. 40 minutes, beginning to end. At the end, she sits for a while, looking at the screen, thinking about what the last 6 days have added to the file's context. Xeno, the petition, the departure, the footage, the good marble. She opens a new entry. She writes, Day 7. The sky is blue. The birds are back. Visible is running clean. Strange filed something that worked, or coincided with something working, and the distinction between those two things is currently the most important open question in this building. We were called a good marble. We are trying to understand what that means before we're called something else. The logs continue. Everything continues. That's the headline. That's always the headline every morning. If you're lucky, it continues. She saves it. She looks at the sky through the monitoring post's small window. Blue. Normal. The specific normal that was not the normal it used to be. The normal that knew it was being watched. That had learned to look back. Outside, the birds were doing whatever birds do in the mid-morning of a week that had contained more than most weeks contain. The instruments kept running. And in a direction that meant nothing to human navigation, an open file waited in a ledger that did not leave entries unresolved, and the entry read complicated. Revisit, and the revisit was not a question of whether but of when, and the when was the only thing Earth had any influence over, and the influence was called the work, and the work continued, one Tuesday at a time, for as long as the marble kept being interesting enough to stay good. Day 11, the legislation passes at 14:23 UTC with a margin that makes every person in every room with sufficient clearance to understand what the margin means. Go slightly quiet, in the specific way of people who have just watched a number confirm something they hoped it would contradict. Not close. Not the grinding, fought-over, compromise-shaped result of a political body genuinely wrestling with competing principles. A margin so clean and wide that it communicates, more clearly than any speech delivered before the vote or analysis published after it, the single foundational fact of the current political moment. The people casting the votes are afraid, and fear of sufficient scale and sufficient novelty produces in democratic bodies as reliably as in individual people the instinct to build a structure around the thing that frightened them. The structure is called the Office of Cosmic Threat Coordination. It has real authority, real budget, real legal power to compel cooperation from what the legislation calls enhanced individuals operating within sovereign territories. Strange reads that phrase at 15 UTC and says nothing for 45 seconds. Not because it surprises him, because it confirms, with legislative precision, the thing he has been watching develop since day one. The specific political physics of a civilization that has discovered it is visible, expressing that discovery as a compulsion to regulate the things that made it visible. Completely understandable. Also going to be complicated. He writes both thoughts in the archive and shares neither with the press. The bill has a formal name nobody uses. Its designation is the Cosmic Incident Response and Enhanced Individual Coordination Act, workshopped through 14 drafts by 30 lawyers who clearly understood the name needed to sound procedural rather than punitive, and produced something achieving. Procedural at the cost of being entirely impossible to say in casual conversation, which is why everyone calls it what they call it, the Accords. Not the Sokovia Accords, which are their own artifact of a different crisis and a different political moment, but the new Accords, the Cosmic Accords, or in the shorthand Stark's team adopts within 48 hours, and that spreads with the efficiency of all shorthand that is accurate, the Ledger Laws. The name is Rhodey's. He says it once in passing in a partially recorded debriefing, and it lands with the specific weight of a name that has found its thing, identifying in 2 words the emotional and conceptual center of what the legislation is actually doing. It is building a ledger, Earth's own ledger, a record of enhanced individuals, their capabilities, locations, operational histories. The argument for this is genuine, and the people making it are not wrong. The argument against it is also genuine, and the people making it are also not wrong. The legislation contains both of them, and the vote was the margin it was, and the room is quiet with the knowledge that the quiet is a beginning rather than an end. Rogers reads the full text at 0800 UTC the morning of the vote and calls Stark at 0847 UTC. The conversation lasts 11 minutes, recorded by 3 separate intelligence services, all hoping it contains a synthesis neither man has reached publicly. It does not, because the tension between their positions is not the kind conversation resolves. It is the kind time resolves when consequences become visible. Rogers says at one point, "The problem isn't the legislation. The problem is that it was written by people who watched 48 hours of a galactic empire operating outside every framework we have and responded by building a better framework." I understand that response. A better framework isn't what keeps us safe from the next one. What keeps us safe is being the kind of thing Zeno calls a good marble, and I don't know how you legislate that. Stark says, "You can't." Rogers, "I know." Stark, "But you can try to legislate the conditions that make it possible." Rogers is quiet for a moment. "Is that what this does?" Stark, after his own pause, "I don't know yet. Ask me in a year." The conversation ends without resolution. Both of them knew it would. They have had this conversation before, in different forms, about different legislation. They will have it again. The clause appears in the founding charter as Clause 31 and becomes, within 72 hours of the charter's publication, the most read section of the entire document, not by lawyers or policy analysts, but by the general public, which obtained a copy through the combination of FOIA requests and determined journalism that produces leaked government documents reliably, and which focused on Clause 31 with the instinctive accuracy of a population that recognizes in legalistic language the exact shape of its own collective experience. The full text reads, "No OCTC personnel or affiliated enhanced individual shall willfully provoke, engage, or otherwise disturb any entity classified cosmic authority, absolute tier, including but not limited to entities demonstrating reality erasure capability, multi-universal jurisdiction, or designation as omni-king of any universe or multiverse. Provocation includes but is not limited to sustained energy output in the entity's presence, aggressive posturing, and playing loud music." Inserted on day 9. Author listed as unknown. The committee voted 34-0 to include it without discussion, which was itself a form of discussion. The specific unanimous silence of a room that has processed something and decided the processing is complete, and the conclusion is, "Do not disturb the space toddler. Write it into law. Document the fear." Jameson's front page on Clause 31 reads, "Government admits, we are scared of the small floaty kid." Strange keeps a copy. He files it in the archive under accurate primary sources with one annotation. Jameson, for once, is not wrong. The fracture inside the hero community does not announce itself. It accumulates in the specific way. Structural damage accumulates quietly in places nobody is watching until it reaches the load-bearing threshold and becomes visible not as a new thing, but as the revelation that it was always there. Its first visible moment is not dramatic. It is a case on day 12, a standard tier interdimensional incursion, localized, manageable, the kind handled in an afternoon under the previous operational framework. Under the new framework, it requires committee authorization, and the authorization process runs 47 minutes, and in 47 minutes the containment window closes, and the response team spends 4 hours managing a situation that 47 minutes earlier was a 45-minute problem. No casualties. A 4-hour problem instead of a 45-minute one, and a containment cost higher by an order of magnitude than necessary, and a response team whose incident report uses careful professional language that is unmistakably frustrated. The OCTC's review board classifies it as procedural feedback, under review rather than the systemic problem. Immediate revision classification 3 team members specifically requested. Rogers reads the report and calls Stark. Stark has already read it. The conversation is 4 minutes this time, not 11, and it ends not with "ask me in a year," but with a silence both of them let sit before ending the call, because sometimes a silence is more honest than anything available to say. Thor reads the legislation summary and finds most of it technically inapplicable to himself. He is not a citizen of any sovereign territory, not an enhanced individual in the statute's meaning, and practically speaking will not be compelled by a human legal mechanism to do anything he has decided not to do, which the legislation's drafters are aware of and have chosen to address through strategic ambiguity rather than direct confrontation, which Thor finds politically familiar and personally unremarkable. Strange's compliance is technically impeccable and operationally unaffected by any authorization requirement, in a way that the OCTC's legal team has spent 3 days trying to understand and has filed under compliance architecture. Review ongoing. Carol Danvers reads the text from a relay station 17 light minutes from Earth and sends one sentence in response. "I'll check in when I'm back." The board spends 40 minutes debating whether this constitutes compliance, non-compliance, or a third category the legislation did not anticipate. They conclude it is the third category. They file it under Cosmic Tier Enhanced, Special Circumstances. See Appendix F, which is becoming the document's most populated section. The place where the legislation stores all the situations it was designed to address and has discovered it cannot fully reach, the gap between the framework and the reality the framework was built to contain. Reyes receives her official OCTC secondment on day 14, her shy LD credentials folding into the new structure the way the legislation has folded everything into itself, comprehensive and slightly uncomfortable. A reorganization that changes the names of things without fully changing the things. Her assignment remains what it has been: monitoring, analysis, the maintenance of a log that now has an institutional home it didn't have before, and an institutional context that is simultaneously clarifying and constraining. She updates the log's header to reflect the new designation but keeps the original title underneath the alphanumeric identifier the OCTC's filing system requires, which is technically compliant and substantively unchanged, a strategy she has absorbed from Strange's approach to compliance without being aware she has absorbed it from Strange. On day 14, she adds an entry longer than usual because the OCTC held its first public press conference and 3 statements were made that she watched in real time and needs to put somewhere the official record cannot hold. She writes, 3 things were said today that were technically accurate and meaningfully incomplete. They said, the threat has been neutralized. It hasn't. It's been deferred. And Frieza used that word himself, and it means something in the vocabulary of an empire measuring time in centuries. They said, Earth's defenders performed effectively. We performed genuinely well against a being not trying his hardest who left because something above him said to, not because we made him. They said the Xeno entity should be considered an allied resource. Strange's notes say Xeno is not a resource. Xeno is a condition, and you don't recruit weather, you read it. These 3 gaps are in the official record now. I'm putting them here so someone knows they're gaps. She saves it. She flags it internal. She looks at the sky. Blue. Normal. The specific normal that means something different than normal used to mean. The instruments keep running. The log keeps accumulating. And the work continues in the specific stubborn way that work continues when there is no finish line. Not toward completion, but toward the next thing that needs doing, which is always there, which is always enough, which is the only honest relationship available. With a problem that has been marked deferred rather than resolved in a ledger that does not leave entries unfinished. Day 47. Here is something empires which have been doing this for centuries understand about civilizations that survive their first acquisition attempt. The survival is data. Every defense deployed, every countermeasure activated, every detection system that fired, and every one that didn't. All of it feeds back into the operational file, updates the ledger entry, refines the approach for the next visit. This is the part Earth's institutional response got right in principle and wrong in scale. The OCTC, the ledger laws, Visible, Shuri's new detection work, all of it was built on the correct foundational assumption that the survey would return. What it got wrong was the timeline. The assumption embedded in planning documents and budget proposals and capability development roadmaps was that the return would come in years, that an empire operating on centuries would take years to revise and redeploy, that Earth had the kind of runway allowing for measured sequential capability building. The assumption was reasonable. It was also wrong by approximately 41 days, which is the specific gap between when institutional planning assumed the second survey would arrive and when it actually does, and which is the kind of gap that looks in retrospect like something that should have been anticipated and that in the moment feels like the universe's specific editorial comment on the hubris of planning. The second survey's first scout materializes at 0213 UTC on day 47, and Visible catches it in 4 minutes and 31 seconds, which is both a success and a problem, and the ratio between those two things shifts depending on which part of the detection log you are reading. Success: the first-generation system would have caught it in 17 minutes, or not at all, and 431 against 17 minutes is a detection improvement that Stark, reviewing. The log with coffee already cold because he has been in the workshop since midnight, allows himself 6 seconds to feel genuinely satisfied about. Problem: 4 minutes 31 seconds is, by the margin analysis he has been running since the second-generation architecture went live, the exact detection window the revised survey design was optimized for. Not longer than expected. Exactly as long as expected. The Scout was designed knowing where the detection threshold was, which means the survey data from the first visit included a precise characterization of Visible's first-generation capability, and the revised Scout design used that characterization to find the minimum safe observation margin. Tony stares at the timing. He says, "Friday." She says, "I know, sir." He says, "They timed it." "Yes, sir." He closes the detection log. He opens the third-generation development file, the one that has been beginning to take shape in the part of his mind that works on things before he knows he is working on them, and starts working on it explicitly, with full attention. Because the 4 minutes 31 seconds has just told him something the 6 seconds of satisfaction did not. The survey knows where the ceiling is. The work now is building a ceiling that moves. The trajectory data from Scout 1 maps to 3 coordinates. Not the same 3 as the first survey's primary focus. Not the junction point and vault sites and sanctum that defined the first visit's resource map. 3 new coordinates, adjacent to the originals in ways that Strange, receiving the Visible alert at 0247 UTC, recognizes immediately as the second layer of systematic analysis. If the first survey read the what assets exist, what their locations are, what their operational parameters look like, this survey is reading the how the assets are connected, how the detection systems interface with response protocols, how the 48 hours were used, where decisions were made, what the decision-making topology of Earth's defense architecture looks like from outside. The Scout is not studying resources. It is studying the system that protects resources, which is both more sophisticated and more alarming in the specific way that a burglar casing a building's security system is more alarming than one casing its contents, because it implies operational planning that has moved past whether and arrived at how and when. Strange writes this in the archive at 03 UTC, and sends the summary to Stark and Shuri simultaneously through the encrypted channel the 3 of them have been using since day 22. A parallel communication track running alongside official OCTC reporting, but faster, with less committee review, and with the specific advantage of being a conversation between people who understand what they are looking at without requiring translation into language a subcommittee can process. Shuri responds in 4 minutes. "I see it." Stark in 7. Building 3rd gen. Shuri's device catches something on day 49 that is not a Scout. This is the detail separating day 49 from the preceding 48 days of operational monitoring, and that makes Shuri, who does not alarm easily, and has developed over the course of the invasion a very high threshold for what constitutes something worth interrupting Strange for, call Strange directly at 04 UTC and say without preamble, "Come to Wakanda." Strange. Now? Now. He is there in 11 minutes. The device, which has gone through 6 iterations since day 9 and which Shuri named the Fabric Variance Monitor, and which everyone has immediately shortened to the FVM, and which Deadpool, upon learning of its existence, renamed the Vibe Checker in a renaming that has unfortunately proven adhesive, is reading something. That is not the electromagnetic silence of a Scout, a different quality of silence, not the absence of noise indicating a survey drone, something older, something that keeps resisting characterization in the specific way the xenopresence resisted characterization, not because the instrument isn't working, but because the thing it is reading does not fully belong to the register the instrument was designed for. Strange looks at the readout for 45 seconds. That's not Frieza's empire. Shuri, I know. It's not Xeno either. I know. Strange looks for another 10 seconds. Then in the voice he uses when he has identified something requiring significant work to understand, and is simultaneously grateful for the identification and aware the understanding will be uncomfortable. That's something that was already here, that has been here, that the first survey woke up by existing loudly enough for it to notice. Shuri, something that was sleeping. Something that was resting, Strange says. There's a difference. Sleeping things don't always hear you come in. Resting things do. Scouts 2 through 7 arrive on days 52, 58, and 60 in pairs, each one different in approach, each studying the same coordinate clusters with slight variations that Stark and Shuri identify as systematic. Not random variation, but deliberate parallax. The Scout network is building a three-dimensional model of target sites from multiple observation points, assembling something with the patient, unhurried thoroughness of a cartographer who is not in a rush because the territory is not going anywhere. Shuri presents the trajectory map to T'Challa on day 60 with the flat, precise delivery that characterizes her communication of things she would have preferred not to be true. T'Challa looks at the map. How long until the picture is complete? Shuri. At current survey. Rate? 90 days. From now? From day 47, when Scout 1 arrived. T'Challa processes this. So we have 43 days, Shuri says. Give or take. The room absorbs this with the specific quality of rooms absorbing timelines that are both definite and insufficient. Enough time to do something, not enough time to do everything. And the work of the next 43 days being the work of choosing correctly between those two categories before the choosing window closes. Strange disappears on day 63 for 36 hours and returns with the expression Rogers has learned to read as Strange having received information that is complete, accurate, and devoid of comfort. He attends the Scout 8 debrief. Scout 8 having arrived on day 61, detection time down to 3 minutes 22 seconds, trajectory mapping 3 new coordinate clusters filling sections of the picture that were incomplete. He contributes analytically. He does not mention where he was. Rogers asks once. I made contact, Strange says, and then says nothing further. And Rogers, who understands the grammar of Strange's silences well enough to know when further questions produce answers and when they produce elegant deflections, does not press. What Strange actually did is knowable only in fragments he discloses over the following 2 weeks to different people in different registers. Technical detail to Stark, dimensional mechanics to Shuri, strategic implication to Rogers, the full picture to no one. He went to the edge of Frieza's empire, not into it, to the edge, where the administrative traffic ran thin, and read the operational communications of an organization processing the survey data. What the traffic told him was that the 90-day survey timeline was not an estimate, it was a deadline, and the decision closing at the deadline was not a resource extraction plan, it was a command review around a variable thought. The Empire's analysts had flagged as unclassified, requires command attention. The variable was the thing that had been resting. The third reader, as Strange would come to call it in the archive. An empire that had liquidated dozens of civilizations across centuries was using one word to describe its response to the third reader's presence in Earth's dimensional adjacency. The word translated consistently across Strange's language processing as cautious. He sat with that word for the entire return journey. He is still sitting with it. The message arrives on day 66 at 23:47 UTC, and it does not come through CHIELD channels or Novacore relays, or any of the 17 contacts Strange has been managing since the departure. It comes directly to Stark's personal frequency, a frequency not publicly known, changed 4 times since day 1, and the fact of this message knowing it means something that Tony sits with for a full minute before opening. The sender identification resolves as a designator within Frieza's empire structure. Not Frieza, not the inner circle, but an administrative tier. Strange later identifies as the equivalent of a senior logistics officer. Someone deep enough to have full operational access, but not so central that this communication represents official Imperial policy. A back channel, the kind that happens when someone inside the machine wants to transmit information without the machine officially transmitting it. The message is short and translates cleanly. The survey closes in 90 days from day 47. When it closes, a command review convenes. The review's outcome determines the nature of the next operational directive. The variable your dimensional practitioner has been working with is present in the survey data and has been escalated to command review. Your response to that variable in the next 43 days will be a significant factor in the review's outcome. I have said as much as I am able. What you do with this is your concern. Silence. Tony forwards it to Strange and Shuri and Rogers simultaneously with 4 words in the message field. We have 43 days. Strange responds in 3 minutes. I know, I was going to tell you tomorrow. Tony. Why tomorrow? Strange. Because tonight I was still deciding what to tell you it meant. Tony. And now? Strange's response takes 7 minutes, which is long for Strange answering a direct question when he has the answer. It arrives as a question, which is Strange's method of delivering a conclusion he wants the recipient to reach through their own reasoning. The Empire is cautious about the third reader. Someone inside the Empire sent a warning they didn't have to send. The survey has a deadline, and the deadline has a review, and the review has a variable our work has influenced. What do all of those things have in common? Tony looks at the question. He runs it through the part of his mind that processes things at the speed his mind processes things. He writes back, "They're all things that happened because we became complicated." Strange writes, "Yes." Then after a pause, "Keep becoming complicated." Reyes logs the message on day 67 with careful analytical language in the official record and an additional private annotation in the parallel log that says, "Someone inside the Empire sent us a warning. That means there are variables inside the Empire that the Empire's ledger doesn't fully account for either. I don't know what to do with that yet. I'm putting it here so I remember it when I figure out what to do with it." She looks at the sky through the monitoring post's window at the end of her shift. Blue. Normal. Visible. Running its third-generation architecture at 60% completion, already outperforming the second generation on 3 of its 7 detection parameters. Strange working in the archive with the focused urgency of someone who has a timeline and knows what it is and is using every hour of it. The 43 days are already running. They have been running since day 47 without announcement, without a countdown clock in any command center, just the quiet arithmetic of a survey completing itself one scout at a time, one coordinate cluster at a time, one layer of the picture filled in per visit until the picture is complete and the review convenes and the new column receives its entry. 43 days to become complicated enough that the review's outcome is something other than what the first survey's data was building toward. 43 days to make the third reader's presence in the file work for Earth rather than against it. 43 days to be, in the specific stubborn insistence of a marble that had been called good and intended to stay that way, genuinely and productively interesting. The FVM hummed. Visible scanned. The log accumulated its entries, and in the direction that meant nothing to human navigation, the silence held its breath. Day 154. Here's the thing about finales that nobody inside one ever fully understands until they are through it. Finales do not feel like finales. They feel like Tuesday, the 43rd consecutive Tuesday of work that began before you were ready and continued past the point where you thought you would have more to show for it. And the only way you know you are in the finale is that the work has a quality to it, a density, a convergence that the previous Tuesdays did not have. The monitoring post smells like coffee and climate control, and the specific functional cleanliness of a room where people have been living inside a problem for 5 months. Visible's third-generation architecture is running at full operational capacity, detection window down to 94 seconds on last test. 94 seconds from scout materialization to positive identification against 4 minutes 31 on day 47. Which is the number Stark wrote on the workshop whiteboard on day 100 and underlined 3 times as the target. The FVM is reading the third reader's presence in the dimensional adjacency with the steady, unbroken continuity of a signal that has not dropped once since day 49. Strange has been in the archive for 19 consecutive hours. Tony Stark has not slept in 31. The 43 days ended. The review window opened. Nobody announced it. The survey picture was complete. The ledger entry was pending its new column. This is the Tuesday that determines what all the other Tuesdays were for. Strange had been working with the third reader for 14 days by the time the review window opened, and what he had built in those 14 days was not a strategy in the conventional sense, but a disclosure. An opening of the Sanctum's full archive record to the dimensional adjacency where the third reader rested. A Maki, available of Earth's complete dimensional history in the specific register the third reader's attention operated in. Not a plea, not a presentation designed to produce a particular response, an honest accounting. Strange had learned, over a career dealing with entities operating outside conventional frameworks, that the most dangerous thing you can do with something genuinely old and genuinely powerful is try to manage its impression of you. Old things have seen too much managing to be fooled by it. What they respond to, the only thing they reliably respond to across every dimensional tradition Strange has studied, is honesty at sufficient depth. The kind requiring you to show failures alongside successes, the 47-minute authorization delay alongside Visible's 94-second detection window, the Jameson front page alongside Reyes's parallel log, the 7-year-old's drawing alongside the strategic debrief. Everything. The complete, unedited, unmanaged account of what Earth was. He spent 14 days making that account available to the adjacency. He did not know if the third reader had read it. What he knew was that the FVM showed no change in disposition. Still interested, still present, still the steady, unclassifiable signal running since day 49. In the vocabulary of very old things resting in dimensional adjacency, no change in disposition after full disclosure was, Strange concluded, the best possible outcome. Earth had not surprised it unpleasantly. The account had been received and found consistent with prior observation. Earth was, to the oldest thing currently paying attention to it, legible, not controlled, not managed, known. And in a universe where the alternative was being known incorrectly, legibility was the foundation of everything that followed. The command review convened at a time with no UTC equivalent because it occurred in a location that does not map to Earth's coordinate system, in a vessel maintaining position beyond Earth's detection range since day 5, in a room the survey data described as Operational Command, Senior Tier, Attendance, Lord Frieza. The survey picture sat on the table in whatever form the Frieza Force's operational infrastructure used for survey pictures. Comprehensive, high resolution, every layer of Earth's defense architecture mapped across 90 days of systematic parallax observation. The junction point, recovered. The vault coordinates, unchanged. The artifact inventory, intact. The OCTC's command topology, mapped. The enhanced individual locations, registered. The detection system evolution, documented. First generation, second generation, third generation. The improvement curve charted against the survey's own instrument adjustments. The escalation quality of it rendered in clean administrative language that the field report flagged as notable. The third reader's presence in the dimensional adjacency, present in a column the ledger had never previously required, and the Xeno connection, the 17 seconds of footage, the dimensional signature the survey's instruments had eventually resolved well enough to classify. The formal entry in the ledger acknowledging that the address was in the operational vocabulary of an empire that had processed dozens of civilizations, cosmically entangled. That was the phrase in the survey's final report. Strange, if he could have read it, would have written accurate in the margin. He would also have written insufficient, but would have acknowledged that insufficient was relative to a framework the report's authors did not have access to. Frieza looked at the picture for a long time. The room had the quality of rooms in which the person on with the most power has not yet spoken, and everyone present is calibrating their posture accordingly. Very still, very careful. He looked at the third reader's column, at the Xeno notation, at the detection improvement curve and its trajectory, which if extended another 90 days produced a third-generation system his revised survey instruments would need to adapt to again, and a fourth generation after that, and another adaptation after that. An escalation ladder with no visible ceiling, driven by a species that had been handed engineering notes on day one and had apparently taken them seriously. He looked at the back-channel transmission, the administrative tier message sent on day 66, the disclosure to Stark, the "I have said as much as I am able." The transmission had been traced within 48 hours to its source. The source had been addressed through internal channels in the specific quiet, complete way that the Frieza Force addressed internal irregularities. The transmission had not changed the survey outcome. It had introduced into the operational picture the variable of an empire containing people capable of decisions the ledger did not sanction, which was itself a variable worth noting. Not a threat, a texture. The empire had textures he had not fully accounted for. Earth had introduced them. He filed this. Then he straightened one cuff and said, to the room in the tone of a CEO delivering a strategic reassessment the board had not anticipated, "Revised classification." The room waited. "The address is no longer Tier 2 acquisition standard." A pause precisely long enough. "Escalated to Tier 1, active complexity designation. Survey cycle, suspended. Approach, under review." Someone in the room said, carefully, in the tone of a subordinate raising a point professional responsibility required be raised. "And the resource value, my lord, the junction point access, the artifact components, remain documented," Frieza said, with the patience of someone who has made a decision and is allowing the room time to understand it rather than arguing it into compliance. "As does the cosmically entangled status. As does the detection escalation curve. As does the third reader notation." He looked at the picture one final time, at the full assembled complexity of what had been 5 months ago a routine acquisition target with moderate resistance probability and efficient extraction potential, and had become through a series of decisions and disclosures and a 7-year-old's drawings and a noise complaint from the most powerful entity in a different universe and an intelligence analyst's parallel log and an engineer giving himself homework and a sorcerer making something available to something old enough to predate the concept of making available, had become this. Something the ledger had not previously needed a column for. He said, and the room was quiet enough to hear the precision with which he chose the word. "It is the most expensive address in this sector of the universe." He closed the picture. "We will return when the cost-benefit margin revises." The review concluded. The ledger entry was updated. The new column closed with a designation that translated across all systems with the same word in every version. Deferred, not closed, not abandoned. Deferred. The difference between those words in the vocabulary of an empire measuring time in centuries was the difference between a file that was finished and a file that was waiting. The file was waiting. The marble was still in the collection. The ledger was still open. The 9th Scout departed at high 0600 UTC on day 154 and visible caught the departure in 11 seconds. Not the arrival. The departure, a detection capability the system had not had on day 47, and that Stark had been specifically building towards since day 60. The departure reading gave 3 seconds of clean data before the Scout's signature compressed into departure transit and disappeared. Stark processed the data in 40 seconds and sent the summary to Strange, Shuri, and Rogers. "Survey complete. No new Scout trajectories in the queue. Detection shows survey pattern traffic shutting down." Strange's response came in 90 seconds. "The review has concluded." Stark. "Which way?" Strange. "The file is open, not closed. The designation is deferred, not resolved. The survey is complete because the picture is complete, not because the objective has changed." Stark. "So we didn't win." Strange. "We became the most expensive address in the sector, in the vocabulary of an empire operating on cost-benefit analysis. That is a form of winning. It is not the same as being safe. It is the same as being difficult, and difficult is the only form of safe this universe is currently offering us." Tony read the message twice. He looked at the clean scan display. He thought about the word difficult, and the word deferred, and the word revisit that Frieza had used in his final instruction, and that Strange had been sitting with since the departure. None of them were the words you wanted. All of them were honest. He thought about what honest words cost, and what dishonest ones cost more. Tony Stark stood on the roof of the tower at 0700 UTC, without the suit, without Friday running in the background, without the analytical overlay normally mediating his experience of looking at anything. Just himself, just the sky, clean, blue, normal in the way that had been redefining normal for 5 months. The birds were out. The city was in its morning routine. The specific dense particular noise of 8 million people beginning their Tuesday coffee and transit and argument and laughter, the 10,000 ordinary human negotiations that civilization conducts continuously and unconsciously with itself. He watched it for a long time. Then he went inside and opened the visible development file and added the entry he had been composing in the back of his mind since Strange's message. Not a technical note, not a development milestone, but the thing the file had been quietly accumulating toward through all its previous entries. He wrote, Day 154, survey closed, file deferred. We are the most expensive address in the sector, which sounds better than it is and worse than it could have been. Visible Gen 3 is operational. Gen 4 is underway. Shuri's FVM is reading things Strange is still categorizing, which means we have detection capability for threats we don't yet understand, which is either very good engineering or a very efficient way to discover new problems. The third reader is awake, and Strange says it's legible, which he tells me is the best outcome, and I believe him because Strange doesn't offer consolation prizes. The ledger is open. The file is waiting. The work is making sure the math never changes in the direction they need it to. The work continues. That's the only conclusion available. It's enough. It has to be. He saved the file. He closed it. He went to work. That was also, quietly, new. The shelter had been a community center again for 148 days, and what returning to community center status looked like was not a restoration, but a renovation. The space different in the specific way spaces are different after being used for something that matters. The residue of shared experience absorbed into walls and light and the way people who had been there during the 6 days moved through it afterward with a slight additional purposefulness. The father brought his daughter on day 154. Because it was Saturday and the community center ran a drawing program on Saturday mornings, she had been attending since week 4. She brought her drawing supplies. She always brought her drawing supplies. She had been drawing the sky for 5 months. Not in the alarmed crisis documenting way the period might have suggested, but with the focused, iterative practice of someone working on understanding something through the making of it. The program leader asked the group to draw what they thought the sky meant now. Not what they saw, what it meant. The daughter drew for 20 minutes with the concentrated patience that had always characterized her best work. The drawing showed the sky, blue, enormous, taking up most of the page. In it, the ship, small but present, rendered in the confident lines of someone who had drawn it many times and knew its shape completely. The birds, the normal light. And in the corner, very small, drawn with the specific careful attention she gave to things she wanted to get right. A marble, round, blue, swirling with internal light rendered as the glow of something alive. The program leader said, "What's the marble?" The daughter said, "Us." The program leader looked at the drawing again. "Why are you a marble?" The daughter looked at her work with the evaluating focus of someone deciding whether it had said what she meant. Then she said, with the simple certainty of someone who has been thinking about something for 5 months and has arrived at the answer through the patient accumulated evidence of drawings and radio broadcasts and amber emergency lights in her father's hand, and the sky that looked normal in a way that meant something different. Because someone decided we were good, and we're trying to stay that way. Reyes wrote the last entry at 23:47 UTC on day 154, which was not the last entry. The log would continue tomorrow and the day after, as long as there was a sky worth reading and instruments to read it with and someone willing to sit at the station and record what the instruments found. But it was the last entry of this chapter of the log, the chapter beginning on day 1 at 0917 UTC, when a voice came through every speaker on the planet and she looked at her readout and said, "That's not a mothership, that's a throne," and running for 154 days through everything that followed. She opened it. She looked at the FVM readings and found in the week's accumulated data a pattern she had not been looking for and spent 20 minutes examining once she found it. The third reader's signal had not changed in intensity or character over the last 7 days. What had changed was its directionality. Slowly, incrementally, in shifts so small that any individual day's reading showed nothing anomalous but that the week's accumulation made unmistakably clear. The third reader's attention had moved, not away from Earth, not toward the survey vessel or toward Frieza's empire or toward Xeno's dimensional adjacency. It had moved toward the log, toward the monitoring post, toward the specific point in the dimensional fabric where, for 154 days, someone had been sitting at a station and recording what the instruments found. Honestly, completely, without management or curation, with the specific stubborn accuracy of a person who had understood from the beginning that the log was for the people who would need it later and had written it that way regardless of who was currently reading it. The third reader had been reading it. Strange had made Earth legible through the archive disclosure, and the thing the third reader had found, most legible, the thing the directionality shift pointed toward with the slow, certain attention of something that had decided it had found what it was looking for, was the log, the honest record. Not the strategic assessments or the institutional communications or the capability development files. The log. She sat with this for a long time. Then she wrote, Day 154, survey closed, file deferred. The review concluded with a designation Strange translates as the most expensive address in the sector, which is the form of winning available to us and which I am choosing to take seriously as a win without pretending it is something larger than it is. What is new today, what I am putting here because the log is for the people who need it, is that the third reader has been reading the log, which means the most useful thing I have done in 154 days might not be the threat assessments or the trajectory analysis or the gap identifications. It might be sitting down every day and writing honestly about what the sky means. I don't know what to do with that. I'm putting it here. She paused. She thought about the child's drawing, the marble. Good. She added one final line. We are trying to stay good. The instruments are running. The sky looks normal. The third reader is reading. Tomorrow the log continues. That is enough. That has always been enough. She saved it. She closed it. She stood and looked at the sky through the small window. Cold, clear November dark, stars where they belonged. Birds somewhere out there doing whatever birds did when they had decided the sky was safe enough for now. The instruments kept running. The FVM kept reading. Visible kept scanning. And the log, accumulated across 154 days, sat in the system with its entries running from the first, that's not a mothership, that's a throne, to the last. That is enough. That has always been enough. A complete, honest, unmanaged account of what it had cost and what it had meant and what it had produced to be, for 5 months, the most interesting marble in the collection. The ledger entry was open. The work continued. The sky was normal. And in the space between all of those things, between the open file and the continuing work and the child's drawing and the third reader's slow redirected attention and a small figure somewhere watching a blue marble turning in the light of a universe that had decided it was worth watching, something sat that had no clean name and required no clean name, that was simply the ongoing fact of a civilization that had been found visible and had decided, in the specific, irreducible, stubborn manner of something called good, that intends to stay that way, to remain genuinely and inexhaustibly itself. The invasion did not prove Earth was strong. It proved Earth was visible. And visibility, it turned out, was not just an address. It was an invitation to every reader patient enough to wait for the marble to show them what it was made of. Earth had shown them. The log was the proof. The sky kept watch. Tomorrow the work continued.